Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Mitchell Hora.
And I'm Zach Johnson. This is the Fieldwork Podcast. This is a podcast by farmers for farmers where we dig into sustainability and conservation and how to make those practices work on your farms.
Today we're talking about the driver of the new world, data, and how important that is. As farmers, we're collecting a ton of data about our fields, our inputs, our yields, and agronomic information. There's a lot of questions though that remain about how are we going to utilize this data, who owns it, what are we going to do? What are we going to do with all this information that we've been collecting for a long time?
Yeah, there are a ton of data companies out there right now. Seems like I learn about a new one about every single day, and that's just within agriculture itself. And so this is something that has really caught on. It's really gotten big, and right now, I think the big thing as farmers, I know for me personally, it's trying to figure out how do we use the data to be more economical and, financially beneficial for me on my farm. I mean, what's the difference between what is just really cool data and what actually shows me a return on investment? And right now, I think it's kind of the Wild West when it comes to agricultural data and trying to figure out those kinds of things like I just mentioned. And so we're going to talk a little bit more about that today, and especially when it comes to sustainable agriculture and being able to use data to be sustainable and to implement conservation practices so that you can see what your different practices might, what the differences are that your different practices might be making on your farm. And so we've got a couple of data experts with us on the podcast today. Joining us via Skype, we've got Charles Barron. Charles is the co-founder and vice president of product at Farmers Business Network. And full disclosure, FBN is a sponsor of mine for my Minnesota Millennial Farmer projects. So we're just going to throw that out there.
We're also going to talk today with John McGuire. He's a precision ag and data consultant who runs Simplified Technology Services. He's joining us from Skype as well, and he is out in Toledo, Ohio. Guys, thanks for joining today.
Great to be with you.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having us.
All right, let's start with Charles. Charles, you are with Farmers Business Network. You started that about 5 years ago. For the listeners out there who maybe don't know exactly what FBN is, can you talk about that a little bit, what it is, and maybe how it's changed since you started that?
Yeah, thanks, Zach. FBN is basically a farmer-to-farmer network, and what we do is it's a platform that allows farmers to connect with each other using data. So using anonymized aggregated information to do things like benchmark the farm, find better performing seeds, and find price transparency. So see what actually producers are paying in the market for products. And then since then, it's also expanded, much more broadly to actually help growers buy products, buy inputs, buy seeds, buy crop protection, sell their crops. And even now we have started doing some sustainability tracking as well. So there's a full range of things that a grower can do in FBN. And in fact, everything from data to now even healthcare. But the whole point is, how do you give producers a system that they can use to become much more profitable and really puts their interests first in the farm system?
That's what it's all about right there, utilizing the data to help drive that short-term and long-term profitability. So, Charles, thanks for joining. I'm looking forward to digging more into that. John, you're working with data all the time too, and working with how do we actually interpret that data and get it to work for us. Tell us a little bit about your company and what you do with data.
Yep. Thanks, Mitchell. Yeah. Simplified Technology Services is an independent technology-related company from Northwest Ohio. We work all over the Midwest, however. So we work with data, like you said, and we work with farmers, consultants, people within the retail, fertilizer, and chemical business. And even some NGOs where we do lots and lots of field trials. So like you said, been doing it quite a long time. I started in precision ag back in 1995 and have worked in a lot of different parts of the supply chain, all the way from like I said, working directly with a farmer for a farmer, to working on a large research project back in the middle 90s with Monsanto. So data has been an important part of my entire career, and still helping guys make decisions with it is one of the most pleasurable things I get to do.
So along those same lines, tell us a little bit more on some of the specifics of data that we've been collecting, and what are some of those components that you think are going to be really important to collect in the future?
Sure. So, as a foundation, it seems like the first step in any precision ag pursuit, whether that's a company that's providing a service or whether that's a farmer getting started, is trying to identify those areas of the fields and or units that they're trying to manage. So things that come to mind, Mitchell, are obviously we need to know where the production environments are out there, and yield monitor data is an excellent way to collect information about where those environments change within fields. So being able to look at production environments from the standpoint of water and soil type seem to be the two major drivers to that. So things like bare soil imagery, Varus information, EM38 information, all of those can give us some characteristic of where soil type changes. And then elevation from the standpoint of being able to look at the hydrology within a field and defining those hydrological environments, and then intersecting that with the soil types becomes really important to identifying management zones as related to production environments.
This is something where you've been able to kind of pool that data together beyond just benefiting the individual farmers on their farms alone. Can you talk a little bit about how when you share that data and you get that real large data set, how do you work that with the farmers and what are the benefits of that?
Yep. So we're changing gears a little bit here from individual management units, looking more at what do you do within those environments. And so collecting information across fields when it comes to different management techniques can help define and help other people learn from them. And I think that's what you're talking about is collecting an aggregated data set that basically where people are either recording those things that they're doing within those fields, and being able to document that and provide that as part of the aggregate data set, as well as being able to say, if they are changing some management item, seeing what the result of that change is, either from what they would have normally done in a traditional sense, or up against other management practices. So nitrogen rate comes to mind. We've spent many years collecting different nitrogen trial data, where we've gone back and looked at what is the correct rate given the rate, timing, placement, and form of nitrogen that a farmer would use. And so in my mind, what an aggregate data set does is it gives a farmer the ability to look at ideas that maybe they hadn't had or haven't had a chance to test on their own operation, so that they can basically say, all right, based on what I know about what I do and the aggregate data that I compare to that's much like me, if I do make a change, here's what I can expect. And I think that's really valuable for a farmer, to have that information to draw on and then be able to move forward on their own operation with at least a little background before they just start completely blind. So it's a really good jumping off point is what an aggregate data set does for a lot of the guys that I work with.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. So looking at that aggregated data to see the overall trends, but then I have to interpret that to my individual farm to see how does my farm then compare to the benchmarks, and then I can utilize that aggregated data set as that benchmarking system that I can compare myself against to strategically improve my operation. Charles, I think nobody knows huge aggregated agronomy data sets quite like what you've been able to work on putting together out there at Farmers Business Network. Tell us about your interpretation of aggregated data sets and how they can help us on the farm.
Yeah, well, I think, it all kind of started from the idea of farmers saying, okay, what would I want to know as a farmer if I could look at not just my farm, but if I could look at millions of acres, or I could look at millions of acres in my state, or tens of million acres around the country. And it's literally the idea of turning the actual world into a plot trial. And so instead of just being able to look at your own farm, being able to look, across tens, hundreds of thousands of acres on your soil types, millions of acres around the state, and realizing that, in your lifetime, in your agricultural practice, it'd be very difficult for you to ever experiment fully the full range of seed, soil, fertility, rotation combinations, population, row spacing, all the different kind of combinations and permutations of ways you could grow your crop. And you have to make those decisions every year. Yet there's only so much experimentation you can actually do. That's what aggregated data is so powerful at helping with, is that it accelerates the decision making. It broadens the world you can look at to evaluate practices. It lets you validate and test things that are conventional wisdom or disprove conventional wisdoms about various practices, whether those are seed brands or that's population choices or that's row spacings. So it lets you really just actually see what's going on. And that also started for us in realizing that there really wasn't a broad scale, call it consumer reports in agriculture, that was allowing farmers to accurately share information that was their own information, that was not necessarily coming from a retailer or seed manufacturer, but was their own, and they could actually use and test against each other to see what was actually taking place. So aggregated data can be enormously powerful for growers agronomically. One of the big ways farmers use it from FBN is not only the benchmarking, but actually hybrid seed selection. So it analyzes seeds across tens or hundreds of thousands of acres, and then you can actually see them in your exact conditions. So in your soil types, on other farms, or in soil types similar to yours, and then you can tune the population. You can see which yields they're likely to achieve. But that's and that benefits we've seen accrue all the way up to yield gains on the order of about 17 bushels an acre when farmers use the aggregated data to place hybrids to a specific soil type. But that's really just the agronomic type. There's also a whole range of other information that you can realize when you connect or pool or network data, however you want to term it. So that's things like genetic identity of seeds, where farmers can share seed tags and see when seeds are the same as one another. That's things like price transparency. So farmers can pool the pricing data that they've got and see what they should actually be paying for input. So there can be enormous benefits to growers, and the whole point that growers really need to have more information than the market when they go to buy products, because otherwise they're at a bargaining disadvantage and a shopping disadvantage for their major purchases.
That is really cool. It's cool to see, an online platform that farmers are able to use like that, to be able to share their data so that they can make better management decisions on their individual farms by using all this compound data on the one platform like that. You mentioned that at the top of the show, you talked a little bit about how you are getting into sustainability tracking. Can you talk a little bit about how you can use the data to be useful for sustainable agriculture?
Well, yeah. So the neat thing there is that, again, just like with in our system, a grower has to elect to share their data. So what happens is we've developed a partnership with Tyson Foods, who is wanting to track practices across the equivalent of their grain supply chain. And so we're creating a program that growers can enroll in, opt into. None of their information would ever be shared without them doing that. And then they can elect to share, here's the practices that I'm using on my farm. Here's practices that I'm changing. So maybe I'm changing a fertility program, or I'm adopting a rotational program, or cover cropping, or I'm getting more efficient at my seed selection, all of which would be improving the productivity and the efficiency of the input usage. And so all of which would have various sustainability benefits, and then potentially get compensated for that as well. So it's a program we're in the middle of designing right now. And but the goal is that, to enable farmers to better prove and validate the things they are doing on the farm and the practices they are making, or if they are changing them, prove that they've made those changes, get compensated for making those changes, and have the market reward them for what they're doing. And that's really it's really a cool start to what we view as a very long term program in land stewardship and sustainability.
We're talking today about data, how to put it to use for you, and what concerns there might be with its use. Joining us via Skype, we've got Charles Barron from Farmers Business Network. Also joining us over Skype, we've got John McGuire. He's a precision ag and data consultant who runs Simplified Technology Services.
Yeah, we're seeing, I think, a bunch of these huge companies like Tyson's and whatnot jumping into this sustainability space and saying, we've got to do something about this. Charles, I was actually at an informative meeting that some Farmers Business Network guys were putting on with some local farmers in northern Iowa here just recently. And we were talking about the project and whatnot and very intro into it. So I think it's going to be interesting to see what can be put together, what can come out of monitoring sustainability. John, you've seen this stuff evolve over a long time. In monitoring sustainability, what does that mean to you, especially when it comes to data? And, where do you think this goes?
Yeah, well, I think Charles brings up a good point that any data that's collected around sustainability has to be structured, it has to be well organized, and it has to be to the point of having benefit both to the farmer, but then also to the company within the supply chain. And so I think, Mitchell, anybody that's ever really studied sustainability has probably thought about it or heard about it from the three perspectives of economic, environmental, and social, right? So from an economic standpoint, any changes or anything that you're documenting has to be have some sort of an economic benefit, likely to the farmer, and maybe that slides up the supply chain to the supply chain company. But luckily, most cases, and I think Charles maybe mentioned this a little bit, that any change that you do that has an economic benefit likely almost always has an equal benefit in the environmental standpoint. So if we're tracking information and helping farmers learn to be more efficient with their fertilizer and their inputs within their farming operation, that's going to have that economic benefit. But I think, and the one that throws everybody off when it comes to that, Mitchell, is usually that social part, right? So it's hard to really get your mind around what sustainability means from the stakeholders that are involved. Well, we have the consumer on one end who's really trying to understand what goes into food production and into that product that's on the shelf. So they're one part of that social component, being able to tell that story. And that's why it's important to have that structured and organized data so that you can get that information to them that they're interested in. But also, and I think one of the most forgotten members of that social circle is the farmers themselves. So in other words, you got to be able to come back and take the information that you've collected and be able to put that in one way, shape, or form so that other farmers who may not be that far along in their sustainability trek to be able to jump on board and learn faster than the original people that put on. So being able to get that information out and get that story told to all of those members can be really valuable in both the environmental and economic portions of the sustainability realm there.
Well, there it is, Zach. So going back to documenting the process, utilizing data to be able to back all that up, and taking some of the topics that we discuss here on the Fieldwork podcast and implement them, maybe now with a little bit more direction, like what we talked with General Mills about and all these other partners. Like, there's the exact specifics I don't think are quite all pulled together yet. But the overall direction that we've got to do things more environmentally friendly, that have a social benefit. I like that, component of what John said. But they've got to drive an economic benefit back down to your farm.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what it all comes down to. Because if we can't economically and financially cash flow year to year, then the farms go away, right?
If the farm itself isn't sustainable,
right,
being economically resilient and economically sustainable, then none of this other stuff that we're doing is going to matter because the farm's not even going to be able to survive.
That's
and
right.
To actually implement something.
Yeah.
So,
John, can you touch a little bit on how farmers may or may not be hesitant when it comes to pooling their data and having it out there for everybody to see whether that's anonymous data or not. What are farmers' thoughts on that?
Yeah, Zach, I think most farmers are at that age where they're not as open to sharing their information as maybe some of the younger guys. I think some of the younger generations have grown up with tools like Facebook and Twitter, and they've become accustomed to letting other people know what's going on. Some of the older, and I want to be careful about saying older, some of the more seasoned farmers,
not the young millennials like Zach and I.
Right. Maybe some of those guys are a little more hesitant. And I think it might be as much as anything as not being sure exactly how the technology functions and works. But I think they're also concerned that that they could be taken advantage of with the information that they release. And I always remind them that it's maybe not so much as important the data itself. It's the information that comes from the data. It's the learning that happens from the data that really has the value. And so I always encourage people to make sure that they communicate with the people that they're going to share information with, that they learn who they are, and they make sure they have that trusting relationship. And I think that's the key, is that pick your partners wisely. Make sure you understand what the ins and outs of putting data into a system, but then also how do you get out of it, and then make sure that relationship is a two-way sharing. In other words, if you're going to provide information in or provide data in, make sure that the information that you're going to get back out has equal value or more than what you're putting in. So whether that's a for-pay service or whether that's something that you're getting as a result of some other service provided.
Charles, we're thousands of miles apart right now, and I can just feel you chomping at the bit on this one. What's your response into this? How do we address some of these concerns? John brought up a lot of items there that I think everybody listening to this episode, it's on their mind. How do we address some of those concerns?
Well, I think these are all the right questions, and I think the big thing is understanding who is it that you're working with, and how is that information being used, and for what, and how does it benefit me as a producer, and that's where we see really the value of aggregated data for producers is in actually discovering the insights that would otherwise be impossible to determine, or have been hidden, or have been almost industry secrets, or have been things that weren't able to be revealed from any other means. So the whole point of FBN, as it was created and as it's grown, is to give farmers that platform that they could create that information for themselves in that way. And that's helped lead to some very basic kind of insights about things like the seed industry and practices around relabeling of genetics. For example, we had a project where farmers could share the seed tags and then could determine whether or not the seeds they were planting are being sold by other companies. And we didn't even know what we'd find out when farmers started sharing that information. And then we found out that basically 53% of the soybeans and 46% of the corn seeds were being sold by multiple companies. They were just being labeled differently and had different brand names in the market. That information was worth, thousands, sometimes tens of $1,000s to a grower. Tens of dollars an acre. We saw one seed sold for $100 a bag difference, only made possible by creating that kind of sharing platform. And so the key thing for growers is that, number one, as John said, you've got to make sure the value's there for you. And number two, the whole point is, okay, who are you sharing with and how? And that was the premise of our system, is that, okay, you're sharing with other growers, anonymously, and that ultimately is the key to getting the most value for your information that you've got on the farm.
What do you have for advice for farmers? And maybe you've got some inside, some insight on this, as far as what farmers can do to protect their data. For farmers that are hesitant about it, maybe they want access to this aggregated data, but how do they protect their data and make sure that they're not going to be taken advantage of?
Well, I think the key for us is that the way we constructed it from the beginning is so that you could do as little or as much as you wanted as a grower. So in fact, in FBN, you actually don't even have to share data to be part of FBN at all. You can simply use other aspects of the service without ever adding data. But to see those kind of aggregated insights, it's part of a community, and it's a community of people who contribute. And so, to unlock those insights, people have to share. I think you also have to kind of think about what information is when you think about that. What is it that what are your levels of concern? Are you concerned about someone somehow hacking the information, or having access to your yield data? And you have to remember that online, in a security standpoint, most of the types of things that people are actually trying to go get are basically like your credit card information. It's not the actual on farm or the application data or the yield data. That's kind of what the most common type of security risk is around. It's basically around like transactional data that could be used for someone for a credit card, for example. So I think the thing is, you just have to understand, okay, what types of information do you have? What are you comfortable sharing? If you want to do it, if you don't want to do it, you absolutely don't have to. But we view it as the benefits are quite enormous for folks if they do, and if they are ready to take advantage of them and make a big decision based on what they find out.
So you're saying there's not a whole lot of hackers out there sitting in the suburbs trying to hack into my yield data and figure out how my South Quarter yielded last year?
We haven't seen that one yet. Your standard, your run-of-the-mill security issues online are typically around your identity information or your credit card and things like that.
What about any just all that information that's going in there being just exposed, and the value then that aggregated data set brings about, if that's then exposed and it's not all warehoused, in a secure or it becomes exposed, is that maybe a concern?
Well, I think what you have to think about there is, okay, the infrastructure that it takes to actually do this is quite sophisticated. So you have to use cloud computing systems. You have to use a whole lot of provisioning around security. It's very difficult to do the engineering at this scale in a very simple manner. So we have to use elaborate security provisions and controls simply to be able to set up the operation, to run it on the cloud, to be able to process and manage data at that scale. And it's absolutely not easy to do in any way. And so I think when farmers are out there and they're looking for partners, or they're thinking about, okay, how do I want to use this information or share it? It's really important to also understand kind of the security practices of the people you're working with as well. And that's not just the informational security. That's access controls on the buildings. That's employee access on information. And you have to have very tight controls and standards around all that, and take it extremely seriously, because it's absolutely a concern for our members, and we absolutely will go to exhaustive lengths to make sure we're running ahead of the state of the art on that security.
Thank you to our guests for joining us via Skype.
So, John, a lot of different concerns there when it comes to data privacy. Do we need to be super concerned or not? What's your thoughts when it comes to this and things you've been seeing and hearing?
Yep, Mitchell, I think this is a great topic, and I think it's something any farmer, or anybody for that matter, who is sharing information, and that goes all the way from your Apple Watch all the way up to utilizing the cloud services that are out there. And it reminds me of a story. We were on a plane on our way into Commodity Classic, and of course we were on a plane full of farmers, and we got to talking to one guy sitting in front of us who was from Wisconsin. And we talked a little bit about, what he does with all his information. And we asked him this very question. And he said, it doesn't really concern me because it's just little old me. What is that big company going to do with little old me? And it really, from that perspective, there isn't a lot of value. One farmer at a time, there's not a lot of value. But if you put a lot of farmers together and you put a lot of information together from that, there is a lot of responsibility that goes along with that. And so farmers, I think this comes back to trust, and the three words that come to mind that the farmer should be thinking about is know, like, and trust. You should know the company you're working with. You should make sure that you like the company you're working with, and make sure you trust the company you're working with. And I think one thing I want to bring up here is that a lot of people are doing away with the legwork that used to have to happen with a USB stick or a memory card, for that matter. To be able to utilize cloud services. And they're basically doing it for their own convenience, or maybe their service for providers' convenience. I think what they need to think about is by agreeing and sharing, by agreeing to basically do away with those logistics, what else are you trading away? In other words, are you giving somebody else license to sift through your information as a result of trying to make yourself your life easier by doing away with some USB sticks? And I'm not saying that's good or bad. What I'm saying is make sure that you understand what opportunities you are granting other entities as a result of utilizing their services. And again, I fall back to that know, like, and trust. Make sure you know that company, know what you're agreeing to. Make sure you like that company, you like what you're agreeing to, and basically, I would use those three words as a guide of who I pick to cooperate with, Mitchell.
So, John, you've talked a lot about making sure that you know and trust the company that you're working with when it comes to data. In your mind, do you think there are companies out there who are using farmers' data in a negative way without maybe even the farmers necessarily knowing about that?
Well, I don't know so much as I would call it negative. But I do think that there are, if you read the user agreements closely, that you're granting rights to different entities out there to be able to look and aggregate information anonymously to either improve services, create new services, and be able to basically improve their market standing as a result of having access to your data. And again, I think this comes back to understanding the trade-off that you have for value you gain versus value you share or give away. And that, to me, is where it boils down to, is make sure that you are getting as much as you're giving in those respects. I think that's key.
Well, I think that ties back into kind of what we started with here earlier, and something that's near and dear to my heart as a consultant trying to work in this space is with that data and so many of these big companies coming in. Charles, like you mentioned, Tyson's, how do we get that data to now work for us? And what do we want to be looking forward to as more and more of these companies turn a focus to sustainability and backing that with data?
Well, I think you said it exactly right there. The data needs to work for you. It's your data, you're generating it on the farm. You need to be getting the benefits from it. And there's so many ways in now and increasingly in the next 3, 4, or 5 years where that data is going to be able to open up whole new opportunities for your farm. So 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that was a better prescription. Then what FBN started doing is being able to network it. So now that's network information. That's those kind of insights around seed and pricing, better purchasing. Okay, in the future and in the near future, it's marketing, being able to sell precisely what you're growing, and get paid, specific possibly premiums for either the hybrids or varieties that you've got in field or the practices that you're using. It could be insurance, being able to do automated reporting. So it has so many uses for you on the farm that you just need to have the right structure that you go to put it to work. Okay, and then when it comes to sustainability, I think key thing again there is, understand what what the partner is and what they're doing. In the case of like, what we mentioned with Tyson's, this is something absolutely that growers would have to opt into. They'd have to elect to participate. And then even when they participated, their data would still be anonymous and not, personal information would never be shared and the like. But this really creates a whole new world of opportunity for growers because data and standardization around reporting and tracking allows growers to get paid and market in ways that they haven't been able to before. And that will allow them to tell the story of their farm differently. It'll allow them to communicate to consumers differently if they want to. It'll allow them to access new markets. It'll allow them to participate in product development. So it really will open up an entire new world for growers if they, position themselves to take advantage of it. And again, these are things that are optional for growers to do. By no means does every grower have to do them, but I think the rewards are going to be very, very clear for growers who are who are on the cutting edge here and looking at these new ways to operate their farm.
Telling stories from the farm, Zach, that would never work.
Yeah, no, we can't do that.
Just kidding.
Nobody wants to listen to that. I've got a couple of final questions here, or really just one final question for each of you. Let's start with Charles. When it comes to the sustainability tracking and staying with that topic, where do you see this 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road from now?
Well, I think what you see is that, okay, if you think about your farm today and you think about what you're growing on the farm today and how you're actually getting paid, your market right now is driven by what somebody's buying in the area, by the local elevator, by your opportunities to market that grain. And if you don't have any way of demonstrating differentiation for your grain, then you're going to get paid for field corn, for number 2 corn, and you're going to get paid the commodity price. And on the other side of the coin, what you see is these huge consumer trends that are driving very rapidly changing parts of the food industry. Lots of new brands coming online, very small, what start as small brands reaching kind of pretty large scale very quickly now. You have a whole new world of way that food gets distributed online through people like Amazon. So there's a very new part of the food industry that's growing very rapidly, which wants to be able to tell the story of where the food came from all the way back to the farm. And that historically has not been something that's been easy for grain producers. So I think you look out into the future and you say, these really big, powerful consumer trends, how do I take advantage of them? How do I make sure my farm is positioned for the future? Because I think what's going to be possible here in the not too distant future, and it already is in various ways, is the ability to get paid for uniquely what you're doing in each field. What makes your crop different? Your crop is, you have to remember, your crop's not a commodity when it's in your field. It's a commodity once it reaches the elevator and it starts getting blended. But there's something unique about it when it's in your field, whether that's the genetics you're using, whether that's the practices you're using, your fertility program, your treatment of the soil, even the story of you and your family. Those are all things that actually make your crop unique and can have marketing value for your crop. So I think what you're going to see here is a whole world of brands who want to be able to tell that story very clearly. They need the mechanisms to be able to connect with farmers about it. Farmers need the mechanisms to be able to communicate what they're doing. And what I hope, if we get ahead of this as farmers, that it positions farmers in a way to get paid and not end up in a situation where these are just expected, or this is just a given that you're supposed to be doing certain things, or that regulation is for pushing farmers to do it. And those would be the negative ways in which these changes come on board, rather than having producers create systems, tell their stories and really get compensated, because that's how I think the most enduring sustainable changes will take hold with growers.
Our crop is special, Zach, just like us.
Just like us. That's right.
That's nice. So, John, with that, how does that tie into kind of your final takeaways from all this too? on how we really make this data work for us. Because Zach and I, we want to get a helicopter figured out. We want to buy a helicopter, so we're gonna need a lot of money here.
We don't
to
want to
make
buy
this
it.
happen.
I like it.
Oh, the people over there, they'll
like
figure out who's going to
Yeah,
buy
we
it.
need to get a helicopter. So we need a lot of money.
I like it. I like where your head is. And frankly, that Mitchell is exactly what I was thinking.
That you want a helicopter
Charles
too?
was talking. Well, no, I don't need a helicopter. I'm actually good. But if you wanted to come fly me around, I'd certainly.
Hey, anytime. We'd be all out in
Um,
California right now with Charles. That's what we
right.
would be doing.
Yep.
Awesome. Exactly. And I really like what Charles says about the grain not being a commodity until it gets to the elevator. And I think that's exactly right. It's about aggregation of that grain is where it starts to lose some of its value. And I think, Mitchell, it makes me think from an agronomist standpoint or from the agronomy practices that's going to happen. Zach said something about 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the road. I think we all see the writing on the wall that what we have to do has got to become more efficient in order for us to remain economically sustainable. And I think that's really what the opportunity is with data. I think benchmarking at multiple levels between farmers and on the farm is as important as anything. Understanding those environments, coming back to where I started, and being able to benchmark and utilize information is going to give farmers the leg up to be able to be more productive, be able to better manage their data and their crops for that matter, using that data. But I think it comes back to as farmers need to get better at looking at trends, looking at data, utilizing the tools that are there in order to better improve their agronomic situation. And I think it all starts with within the farm benchmarking, and look at benchmarking data sets that are aggregated. So I'm excited about the future ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Looking at where your farm's at, looking at opportunities to improve, and making a conscious effort to do so. Guys, thanks a lot for both of you for being on with us. We want to continue on a conversation going forward from here. So, John first and Charles, on how do we keep this conversation going? Where can our listeners go to get more info?
Sure. Yeah, you can look us up. I'd send you to the Brookside website. So Brookside is a network of consultants that I work with, Mitchell. It's blinc.com. You can check out all the Brookside consultants out there that have the ability to provide services, agronomic services to you. My contact information there is there as well. So check us out and look forward to possibly working with you on an individual basis.
Yeah, you can find us at fbn.com or of course on YouTube. We have a FBN Farmers channel on YouTube, but the website's fbn.com, and we love to talk to growers about this, and folks who are interested in getting into any of these programs can just visit us there or email us at info@farmersbusinessnetwork.com.
Awesome, guys. Thank you very much for joining us today. That was Charles Barron and John McGuire joining us via Skype for this awesome conversation.
Thanks, everybody.